welcome councillors and welcome to the Alexander family, and we will now commence our formal council meeting. So, Mr. Mohi.
Atu ake au ki te mihi ki o koutou. Ngā mana huri o te whānau a Alexander, a piki mai, kake mai. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Ai tēnei wā e pai no ki te mihi ki a rātou, ku rūpeka atu ki tua te rai. Nō re koutou, ahu kōko whetorangi tia, tēnei te mea atu. If we can just start our meeting with a short karakia, a prayer. I Hawke huri mātou ki a koe tēnei ata. Mana ki tia ia mātou, hui ki te kōre rero ngā mea e pāna ki a tō mātou, ke noa rāhui o ngā tika ngunu whānui. Nō reirei tēnei wā, ka huri ki te whānau Alexander, e te aki mai te tai au, ki rungi te whakamihara o mātou. Nō reira e pā koe, nei mea ka pātai, ki rungi te ingo I hukaraiti, ake, ame. I just welcome you, whānau Alexander, sorry, it's the Māori pronunciation, and just say, as far as the Māori community goes, your contribution to the taiao, the conservation area generally is just greatly admired. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And I'd just like to add to that, to Doug and Diane and your family, a very, very special welcome. This is the first time that we have had an environmental award, and I think it's a wonderful thing that that you and your family are the first receivers of it. I have watched over the years the development of that lake when I used to live in the Twyford area and your area around it, and always wondered about the people behind that. You know, then I found out that it was you and your family. I've greatly, since I moved to Havelock North to a larger piece of land, I have greatly envied the fact that you have had been able to put a lake together and surround it with such wonderful plantings and a lot of deciduous plantings, which makes it especially attractive today. And I imagine that it does look quite spectacular over the last month with all the autumn leaves. The fact that you actually have got down and done this and done it, and I'm pleased that your whole family's here, because it was clearly they would have had their gumboots on and their spades digging holes in the past, which is similar to my family, because these things can't ever be done by just one person, and people are raised on it, and then they take great pleasure. It's something that'll be there forever. And I think that's the enduring thing about this, that in 100 years, your lake and your trees and the park-like surroundings will be still there. And I think that's the, what's the saying, that a man who plants a tree today, Rick will help me out there.
Wisdom is old men planting trees under whose shade.
That's you and I. I imagine that you are still planting, because it's just such a continuous process. So we're greatly honoured that you are the first recipients of our award, and it's going to be a really hard act to follow. So before we give you the award, I'd like to give you the opportunity to talk about the history, because I'm sure councillors and the public, and this has all been videoed, so not to freak you out, but you're on the video, the cameras are there looking straight at you right now. So I think it would be good for us just to hear a little bit about the history and how you did it and the work that you have had to get in and do it. So we give you the floor.
Do I not stand up?
You don't have to, no. You can do it sitting down.
Oh, I'm used to standing up.
You can stand up if you like. You can do whatever you're most comfortable.
Oh, well, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear everybody hear that okay? Thank you very much for that very, very nice introduction and those lovely words. We feel quite overwhelmed, actually, by this award. Something we were never, ever expecting, but it's certainly, I must admit, it's very, very nice to have, and you know, we feel very, very humble about the whole business, really, because we've just enjoyed what we've done. But Diane and I, for the last 50 years, have been, you know, very keen on planting. You know, we've been real environmentalists, I suppose you'd say, and we've always been planting and developing things. And we started off with small wetlands on the main home farm, just practicing for the big event, you see. And eventually, when we bought the property next door in 1978, we were lucky enough to find that a 30-acre paddock was a dried-up swamp that was all full of broken-down willow trees and rapu and blackberry and rushes and all sorts. And it was a real eyesore, and it was right adjacent to the main road into Puketap. And I might add, your beautiful, beautiful cycleway, which goes right past it, and that is really a great asset to Hawke's Bay, that cycleway, and it's well used. Some days I've counted 120 bikes go past there in 2 hours, and you know, during a holiday period.
Stopping at the pub, those Tarradine.
Yeah, well, that's right. That's right. Our lake is only the second biggest asset to Puketap. The pub is the main asset to Puketap. But you know, we're lucky that our family have followed in our footsteps, really, and all our family are here today, and they're all, you know, keen environmentalists as well, and they love planting and growing things. They've all got lovely gardens they've developed themselves, and we're really proud of our family and the way they've helped us out. And so it's really been a family affair building the lake. And in 1978, we were lucky enough to buy this farm next door, which was in a very rundown state, and it was just across the road from our home farm. So we bought the property, and of course, this 30-acre dried out swampland was part of it. So we decided we had to do something with it. It was right in the heart of Puketap, and it was a real eyesore. And we thought, well, we're going to have to rejuvenate it some way or another. So in 1982-83, we had the most serious drought that I can remember in my lifetime. I think they tell me that the 1930s was worse, so I'm glad I wasn't around in the 1930s, but 1982-83 was a long drought. It went on for a year, and it was accompanied by lots of strong winds and westerly winds, and the whole area got so dry. I thought, well, this is the time to get into this thing and start doing something about it. So we decided that we'd try and create a wetland park in that area, you know, so that it was a good habitat for bird life, but it was also good for trees and good for filtering the rubbish out of the water before it got into the Shiraikuri River, and it was a big project, much bigger. It was a family project, and when we started off, you know, we didn't realise. Thankfully, we didn't realise how big a project it was, but it turned into a monstrous project, and we shifted hundreds of thousands of cubic metres of mud, which is not easy. It's not as easy as shifting dirt or shingle. It sticks in the bucket and it sticks in the scraper, and you can't have to dig it out of the scraper, and so it makes the whole job much more difficult. But it was a great challenge, and we rose to the challenge, and we stuck to it and kept going and kept going and kept going, and eventually we ended up with something I feel was really worthwhile. And as time gone by, we've had more and more and more visitors. A lot of them are from overseas. We have bus trips now, you know, from Canada, United States, England, Australia, and the people are just overawed by it. In fact, the funniest part is the people from England, who are surrounded by these lakes around every palace and castle, they are the most impressed, and they say, "Oh, this reminds me of home," and they just love that lake. And of course the locals love it too, and now we've got such a lot of people living in Puketap and beyond that commute to Napier to work every day. They're driving past it every day. We've got the school next door, so the school children use it for the lessons, you know, for bird life and that sort of thing, and also for canoe polo. They go down there for canoe polo practice, which is quite cute, especially in the winter. It doesn't look like a good thing to do, but they do it. And but you know, I think we had a lot of pleasure from developing it and building it, But I think the real pleasure comes now when we see the public enjoying it, and overseas tourists, they just love it. We get camper vans coming in there, and they park up, get out their table and chairs and their beer and things, and I'm busy mowing the lawn, and they completely ignore me. And I come along and I say, "Can I help you?" And they say, "No, we're okay, thanks, we're okay." And I say, "Well, this is my garden you're parked in." And they say, oh, we thought this was the regional council park. And I said, "Well, not yet." I said, this is still our garden." And they go, "Oh, do we have to go?" And I said, "No, you don't. You can stay here. As long as you take your rubbish with you, you're welcome to stay." So we get quite a lot of those, and they're mostly foreigners, I might add. But we get a lot of photographers, of course, because in the autumn, the autumn colours are so beautiful. The photographers just love it, and they have the Asians even get out their tripods and do it properly. You know, they do the whole job really well. But no, it's been a great journey really, and we've enjoyed it, and now the rest of the community are enjoying it, and as I say, a lot of overseas tourists are thoroughly enjoying it. We have several bus tours a year, you know, with Americans, Canadians, and Australians, and they just love it. And we have, of course, with all the retirement villages we've got here around Hawke's Bay, we get the little mini buses with the retirees.
Thank you very much, Roger.
Thank you very much for that wonderful award, and we'll cherish it forever.
Thank you. We'll give you. I just want to say one thing though. It's so important what you've done. That we have a lot of things to be done in around Heratonga and around Hawke's Bay generally, fixing up our rivers and streams, and we just can't do it at regional council. As a community, we've got to get in and get our shovels and spades and do these things ourselves. And you set a wonderful example for the rest of the community to follow. And I'm just hoping that today when people look at this and think about it and they think, I can do something like that, even if I can plant one tree. I mean, you've planted thousands of trees. So hopefully you're going to inspire people to plant 1 or 2 trees, because we need the whole community to get in and help us repair some of the damage which, as a society, we've made over the last 100 years. So really appreciate what you've done. Well done. You couldn't have done it better. So.
Thank you very much.
Being none, would somebody move the apologies be received? Yes, so one there, two there. All in favour say aye. Contrary, no.
Aye.
Carried. Notices? Any notices? No notices. We move on to the presentation award. Item 3, conflict of interest declarations. Has any members got, councillors got any conflicts of interest they'd like to declare? Any personal confessions they'd like to make? All right, there being none, we'll move on. Next item is the confirmation of the minutes of the Regional Council meeting held on the 24th April 2018. I understand, Leanne, that these have been circulated. Okay, they'll all have been read. So is there any objection to any element of the minute? Tom Belford.
Not an objection, but on page 7, there's a little chart, discussion of items of business not on the agenda. The second item is oil and gas plan change, and it seems like the operative clause in that little report is missing. It looks like the intention was to indicate we'd be getting a report on options. Not clear whether we'll get that report in 3 years, 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days. So could it be, could the minutes be amended to indicate when that?
Are you moving that the minutes be accepted with the amendment to that item with the insertion of the words 20 June?
Sure.
Okay, do I have a seconder for that?
Second.
Second, Councillor Curtin. I'll put the question. All those in favour will say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Move to item 4, follow-up items from the previous regional council meetings.
Chair, so these have all been either actioned or in progress as per the status comments, so happy to take any questions from councillors.
Okay, I have a question from my right, Councillor Hewitt.
Oh, just as a follow-up with regard to the minutes, and I had inquired about the hotspot funding for the Tuki catchment in Lake Hartuma, and that was to be an action I had understood that was to be followed up with Ian Maxwell. So I just wonder if you can note that down as a follow-up too, please.
Chief Executive, can you note that for the following meeting? Noted. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Along similar lines, I understood that we were getting a report at some point around the Tranche 2 water applications that are going on down in the Ruataniwha, and I wasn't sure whether it was coming back to this committee or to another committee. Can someone please confirm that for me?
So as I understand, that's coming to the ENS committee.
Okay, could we note on the follow-ups that the report will go to the ENS committee? So noted. Any others? All right. So will somebody do the follow-up items be confirmed? Councillor Bailey, do we have a seconder? Bevan, any questions, any discussion? All those in favour will say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Call for items of business not on the agenda. We have 2 tranches here, as you know. One should be followed with accompanied by a paper, and then we have minor items. So in the urgent items with papers, are there any? There being none, we now move to minor items. Anybody have a minor item for this? Councillor Belford.
Wastewater consents.
Wastewater consents, that doesn't sound minor, but we'll have that. Any others? Okay, that's the minor items dealt with. Let's move now to the, I'll hold item 6 until the chair comes back. I'll move to item 7, recommendations from the Regional Planning Committee. Paper's been circulated. Can we now have, who's going to speak on this? Chief Executive, do you want to lead the discussion on this?
I was going to pass this one to Mr. Skirman, but look,
Mr. Skirman, will you can lead us on this?
I think it's the report's reasonably self-explanatory, so it's probably just a question at this point of taking any questions that.
Okay, well, let's take questions. Anybody has any questions? Councillor Belford.
A lot of this was being kicked to touch in the sense of there was to be a workshop, I thought, of all interested parties to
Correct.
discuss all these issues that's referred to in item 3.1. I'm just wondering when is that workshop likely to occur?
Mr. Skirman?
So there are two workshops that are going to take place. The first is a councillor-only workshop to consider the issue of the performance review. And look, I can't exactly remember the date of that workshop, but it's reasonably imminent. It may be next week. Leanne?
The RPC review workshop is scheduled after the Finance, Audit and Risk Subcommittee meeting next week on Wednesday, intended to start at 1 p.m.
And that's so that's an opportunity for the council to discuss how they want to conduct their side of the review, because as you're aware, the performance review is by the appointers, of which council is half. The second matter was the terms of reference workshop, which is going to take place with all members of the RPC, and currently we are just waiting. There is a paper that needs to clear the co-chairs first before that workshop can take place, and that's sitting with one of the deputy co-chairs at this moment.
Okay. The question Councillor Balfour had is when. So could Leanne, could you draft up an email setting up the dates for both things and circulate them, councillors, so we're cleared that? Councillor Hewitt?
Thank you, Chair. With regard to number 2, and there was a list of outstanding water bodies. So my recollection was that the Tamatea rep had added an additional 2 or 3 water bodies to this, and then with the recommendation that went through, she requested that they were removed. So where do we get to with that? Because I don't know that consultation was done with the wider Tamatea.
Yeah, so my recollection also is that, so though they were, part of the formal motion was that they were included in the secondary analysis, and it was actually after the vote that she withdrew them. So they remain part of the secondary analysis. We've got a conference call this week with Tanya Hopmans and the independent advisors, talking about how we're going to incorporate those water bodies into that analysis. But staff are currently working on the instructions, well, the formal motion of the Regional Planning Committee, in June last year, which agreed to a process on how we were going to work through the secondary analysis of those water bodies, and that's still in play. So it's just a matter of just figuring out how we're going to incorporate these additional ones in, because they'll effectively be subject to the same process.
Councillor Bailey?
Thank you, Chair. Just referring to 3.2, Tom, you're sending a letter to the RPC co-chairs and to Tangata Whenua appointing bodies seeking feedback on the performance of the RPC. I understood that you were also going to be asking elected councillors for their feedback as well? Absolutely. So that will be the subject of the workshop after the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee.
How do we, sorry, Chair, follow up from that? How do we formally put in feedback for consideration at that workshop?
So that will be the subject of the workshop, or we'll be in some respects seeking your reflection and views and guidance on how you want to handle the performance review. Sorry, Chair, with your indulgence, just to make myself clear, you've asked Tangata Whenua for their written feedback on this issue so that we can consider them. So I assume that they'll be circulated before the workshop so we can go through them. I want to know as a councillor what process can I use? Do I just submit them into you for circulation to everyone, or do I just circulate my views amongst councillors? Yeah, okay, so thanks, and I apologise for not making myself clear. The way that the legislation is set up is that it's actually a very ill-defined review process, and the words are effectively is that we will undertake a review of the performance of the appointers will undertake a review of the performance of the RPC by, I think it's September this year. So there are 2 groups of appointers. There's the Tangata Whenua appointers, which are effectively the trusts and organisations that sit behind, and so that was the reason for the letter that was written to them. So that's their input into the review of the performance. Obviously, councillors are also another group of appointers, and so it's not specified that there is a process by which one group has to submit to the other in terms of their review. So I think the way the process is going to work is that each party is going to form their own views of the performance of the Regional Planning Committee, and then we'll probably come together and share those views.
Could I just add, Chair, that I think one of the distinctions here is that the appointer on our side being the council side, is the council as opposed to individual councillors. So the position of the council in relation to this review is something we need to get a collective view on, as opposed to individual views of individual councillors. All those individual views will feed into a view, but I think it will be necessary for the council to craft a position in terms of its view of the performance and effectiveness of the RPC, and to communicate that to the tangata whenua partners. And so we've got some steps to go through to elicit all your individual opinions, and then develop up a collective view, if you like, that's the council's official position on this. Is that clear?
I'm still.
And look, we'll discuss next week whether you want to do that in writing, and you all want to write your own opinion pieces and then we cobble something together, or whether you want to do it via a discussion more informally. That's something which we haven't had any guidance on, and the purpose of next week's workshop was to get guidance on the process.
Okay.
Is that okay?
All right, any further questions? Councillor Curtin.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I want to address two issues at 3.4 and 3.5, if you don't mind. The first question I'd like to pose to Mr Skirman is in regard to the presentation made by Dr Anthony Cole, and I want to ask if any, have there been any engagement of Mr Cole and his approach, and if not, what other alternative methods are we currently engaging to consider cultural assessment on regard to the RPC?
So Dr Cole has been engaged by Council to undertake a cultural assessment, a social and cultural assessment of the impacts of the proposed tank plan change. And so he is undertaking a discrete piece of work that is linked to, but is not directly related to the presentation that he gave to Council. So he is conducting quite an extensive and wide-ranging piece of analysis, including a number of interviews with local stakeholders too, and he is going to provide a report to the tank group, either I think at the meeting, at the June meeting, to effectively give his assessment of findings of what are the impacts of that plan change socially and culturally. So,
following up to that, so that this is an engagement made by tank administrators and the tank group to undertake this engagement of Dr Cole. Is that how that transacted?
Yeah, look, formally, yes. The way it came about was through our work with the tank treaty partner group. Is that they have always strongly felt that the pro forma analysis of a tank plan change, which relies very much, I suppose, on science planning and economic analysis, fell short, and so they strongly advocated for Regional Council to flesh that out with a social and cultural analysis.
So, sorry, I need to be clear on this.
Yeah.
Was it the RPC treaty partners that have instigated that, therefore it is a report back to RPC versus a report back to tank?
Yeah, so thanks for the opportunity to clarify. It is an engagement by my group.
My group is?
So the strategic planning group, and it is Dr Cole's report will be to the tank group, and the catalyst for that was the tank treaty partners group. So it wasn't the regional planning committee that appointed him.
I'm sorry to pursue this, but you're mixing two things up, and I'm not clear on what you're saying. Is it a tank exercise or an RPC exercise?
It is a tank exercise. Dr Cole presented to a joint meeting of the tank mana whenua group and the regional planning committee members. The regional planning committee tangata whenua reps were very impressed by Dr Cole's presentation and invited him to come and address to the wider meeting.
Okay, any other questions?
Yes, I do, Mr Chair. Turning to
This is question number 8.
3.5, and that's the RRMP effectiveness review. I wonder whether the Chief Executive could help, please, with the process we are seeking to follow to arrive at the outcome measures needed for our long-term plan and their consequence and parallel process for the RRMP. Is there any sense of direction in regard to what we're doing with regard to the outcome measurements?
The outcome measurements in the long-term plan tie back to the Council's strategic plan, and those are typically of an aspirational nature, and they are also non-statutory in the sense that the strategic plan is a non-statutory document, and they have been formally adopted by the council, but they don't have any statutory RMA basis at all. The RRMP is a mechanism by which some of those outcomes are delivered, but I would say that they don't have the outcomes in the strategic plan and that have translated through the long-term plan are not particularly of a regulatory nature. So at the moment we don't have any outcome measures that directly relate to the level of regulation or otherwise undertaken in the RRMP. So that's something which we probably need to come back with some more formal advice to you on, I think. When the supporting documents are formally adopted at the end of this month, there'll be visibility of those outcome measures for the long-term plan, and we can have a discussion at that point about how they tie through to the RRMP. I do note, of course, that the RRMP became operative in 2006, so it is 12 years old, whereas the strategic plan is far more recent. So there is a misalignment at the moment because our outcome measures for both our strategic plan and our long-term plan are quite progressive, and they align to the sorts of plan changes that we are doing in places like Tank. But the existing RRMP is founded in the Council's strategic objectives as they were in 2006, probably actually earlier, frankly, when the RRMP was written at that point in time.
Thank you. Now, any other questions?
That's sufficient for the moment.
Thank you. Right, let's move on to have a resolution that the report be adopted. Councillor Bailey, Councillor Bevan. Councillor Bailey wish to speak?
No.
Councillor Bevan?
No.
All right, any other speakers?
Yes, there is, Mr Chair.
Councillor Curtin.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I want to make 2 points in regard to this paper. The first is in regard to the issue of the presentation of the economic theory and accounting methods in terms of the presentation made to the Regional Planning Committee. And I would make this comment that I think it's important, it's vital that we have cultural assessments done. It's vital that we engage with tangata whenua in this way. However, I do have reservations about the nature and purpose and direction of travel that was proposed by Dr. Cole. In my view, this council needs to stand fast when it comes to evidential bases for making decisions and for introducing sound advice. It is my view that there is no place for voodoo economics and voodoo cultural assessments when it comes to this council's decision making, and I would therefore caution and to treat with due regard the advice coming from Dr. Cole and his assessment in the light of the information we received as council a week or two ago. The second point I want to make, Mr Chair, in regard to this paper relates to the RRMP effectiveness review and the outcome measures that we determine in our 10-year plan. I'm pleased to see that we've made good progress resolving or at least identifying RRMP outputs over a 5 to 10 year period. We've now got some coherence in regard to where the staff are coming from, and I'm pleased to see a timetable produced. The element that hasn't been resolved in my mind, and the Chief Executive has referred to it, is once we've adopted the long-term plan on the 30th of June, we commence work with some haste in determining the outcome measures so that we can commence measuring ourselves against that. Whether they are statutory requirements is irrelevant. In our view, this council needs to be held to account with some robust outcome measures that we start measuring on the 1st of July. So I look forward to the paper that the Chief Executive has highlighted, and I hope it goes down as an action item going forward for some robust work in regard to our measurement of outcomes, particularly in regard to environmental performance.
Any other speakers? I'll put the question. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Chair, back to you. You're on item 6, draft statement of intent.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Chair. Really appreciate you doing that. Take all the drawings of a Photoshop. That's the work of your man and then stand in and do that other work. Thank you very much. It wasn't recorded. Damn it. Okay, councillors, we're back to item 6, and I'm not sure there's any voodoo in this. We've got Blair present, just in case you want to ask any questions of him. Do you think there's any questions in this for you, Blair? SOI, sorry. Yeah, SOI. You weren't concentrating, Blair, were you? I was in another conversation. Well, come on up and just in case there's a question. Otherwise, Jessica, I might let you take us through the paper. And then we'll give Blair a little bit of a chance before we launch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So councillors have been provided with a letter of expectation which was drafted based on councillors' feedback to give direction in terms of HBRIC drafting an SOI for the coming 18-19 year, which has been provided for your feedback today. So the ambition is to take feedback today on the statement of intent and to incorporate that into a revised draft, which will be taken through to council, or through to CNS, sorry, before being resolved at council. So today is just an opportunity to provide feedback to Blair and myself, which we'll incorporate into the SOI.
Thank you, Jessica. Just before I hand over to you, Blair, for a second, I was out of the room when we said any conflict of interest. Just put on the table that Peter Bevan and myself are directors, should be recorded, are directors of HBRIC. So just as a conflict, a potential conflict, not that there is one. Blair, the floor is yours for a second.
Thank you. Well, look, I'll assume the paper's been read. The headline for the change from previous versions of the SOI is that it essentially reflects that HBRIC's changed to a holding company, whereas before it was a more active investment company. So any of the previous material that has been in the SOI that talks to HBRIC's role in developing a wider range of investments has effectively been removed. The focus really for HBRIC post the end of this year is around maintaining the ownership of the port. And there's a project that hasn't mentioned in there around supporting the council with some forestry review, but there is a part of the SOI that highlights that we can provide advice to the council on investment, and I've effectively left that silent on the basis that it's covered in the SOI in a generic term, and it isn't the intention as it stands that HBRIC would be doing the investing in forestry. It will only be supporting council to explore its interest in investing, and obviously that has to go through formal council processes. So I'm happy to take questions on the SOI. The dividends, obviously the usual thing that gets discussed. The dividend range reflects effectively what's in the LTP at the upper end, and I'm happy to take questions.
Paul, then Tom. Peter, do you want to press your little light? Well, Paul, then Tom.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Chair. Blair, on what is page 2 of your letter of expectation under revised mandate, you talk about develop business cases for commercial investment activities that support council's objectives and so on, right? That's just taking an abstraction out of that. I'm just wondering, in terms of the draft statement of intent, we talk about the mission statement to be a region with a vibrant community, a prosperous economy and a clean and healthy environment, to ensure that, because this comes back down to, so for example, the presentation Dr. Cole gave us the other day, and the way that we're thinking about how commercial investment ties into social and environmental outcomes. Can you assure me that the thinking that's going in around that is, in terms of commercial investment activities, is not simply based on monetary returns, but also the social and environmental outcomes as well?
I think the headline is there are no investments being pursued by HBRIC, so on that basis there's no criteria being applied because there are no investments, as the only investment that HBRIC holds is the port, and that's on the assumption that the RWSS will be sold, which is the current plan and process. In terms of the port's ability to perform to those environmental requirements, there are a series of environmental objectives in its SOI to HBRIC, and that is part of the requirement from HBRIC to that particular asset. So if the remit for HBRIC was to change to having other investments, I think your question would be pertinent relative to the motives of those investments, but because HBRIC's remit is not to pursue further investments, it's probably a question of relevance.
Sorry for your indulgence, Chair. I'm a little confused because you said that there were, it's not the intention to do further investments, yet the letter of expectation clearly says, and to develop business cases for commercial investment activities. So what I'm not talking about anything that's before us at the moment, because there isn't, as you state, there's nothing before us at the moment, right? But we've been asked to approve a letter of expectation and the statement of intent, which talks about future. And so what I want your assurance on is that the intention is, if there is anything that comes before us in the future, not only we won't just be looking at things in dollar terms, there will also be these social and environmental outcomes required from the council.
Okay, so if I understand that correctly, any business case needs to have a review of the environmental and social impact as part of the business case. Is that essentially what you're asking for?
Yeah.
And I'm happy to say that the intention is to meet council's objectives relative to the business case. The business cases will be developed in conjunction with council, so if council wants to stipulate any particular criteria as part of those business cases, happy to include those. Because we're following HBRC's mission, they will be folded into the considerations, but that'll be on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you, Blair. That's what I was after.
Tom, then back to you, Peter. Could be any other way.
I have 4 questions, if I may. They're all pretty straightforward. First of all, HBRIC is a council-controlled organization, therefore it is subject to LaGuardia. Is that correct?
That's correct.
On page 6 of the intent document, page 20 of ours, there's at the very top line says, and council will be bound by the provisions of the Port Companies Act in respect of the shareholding in Napier Port. What's the significance of that statement?
All of the port companies are subject to the Port Companies Act, and as a result, they're treated differently to standard CCO requirements. So to your question around things like LaGuardia, port company is not subject to the LaGuardia Act, for example. So there are requirements for the port that it must meet as part of law, and as a result, as the owner of the port, the council must ensure that its activities don't interfere with the ability of the port to execute its legal obligations. Like that's the essence of what that says.
So there's no fish hooks in here that we might be constrained from
I don't
something that we're...
I don't believe so.
Third question is, what actual funds does HBRIC have at the moment?
HBRIC doesn't have any funds at the moment. It has some liabilities. It has debt of around about $5.2 million at the moment that resulted from repaying the council's advance relating to the Rurutanafa water storage scheme. And in terms of cash flow, there's a dividend due from Napier Port in June, which will then effectively be passed through to support HBRIC in meeting its SOI requirements to council via a payment of a dividend to council.
So where there are references here to potentially getting external advisors and so forth and so on, or your compensation, how would those kinds of obligations be paid for?
The basic formula is any proceeds that HBRIC receives from the port in the first instance gets applied to the expenses of HBRIC,
okay. Right.
And then we also have debt facility that we can utilise, and then out of those two formulas pops out the available funds for dividend, and essentially debt and surplus funds coming from the port are applied to any expenses at HBRIC.
And my last question is the intention in presenting this statement of intent, and I guess this is more directed at the chairman or James, I don't particularly take this to be our discussion of whether HBRIC has a long-term future. I take this to be a discussion of, back to the letter of advice, there are two specific projects delegated to HBRIC over the next year or so. It would seem that's a full platter for HBRIC to deal with. Is there an intention at some point to decide whether this creature is more than a pure creature of convenience? With all due respect to the individual contributions of the two councillors, and Mr. Druzianic and yourself, I remain unconvinced that this has any value other than as a matter of administrative convenience. And I just want to make sure that today's vote is not any indication of long-term survivability of this enterprise.
Perhaps I should answer that.
Sure.
Tom, any time council decides by a majority they can wind up HBRIC.
Well, we've agreed as a matter of convenience it shouldn't be for the moment.
That's right. We have agreed that that it's sensible because of some transactions that would be difficult to unwind, would be commercially not that sensible to have HBRIC continue as the vehicle to hold certain assets at the moment until we unwind a few things. And then we'll decide going forward. That's why we have reduced the directorship right down. We have one commercial director, the other two directors aren't being paid. So it's very much a stand-in operation at the moment.
If I could just make an observation, that I would describe it this way to you, Tom, that this is simply business as usual, pending a decision of council of what the future is.
That's right. I have to come back to Neil because Peter and Alan were lined up before you, and then I'll back to Neil.
Thanks, Chair. So this is...
If I may just add one point to the last question, if you're moving on to another one, Councillor Bevan. We're required to provide an SOI as part of the Local Government Act, so this is that document, and per my introductory comments, this reflects the holding pattern, not any other ambition. So the decision on where to from there is one for Council to make at a later stage.
Exactly right.
So a comment and a question, Chair, and both are matters that I probably should have picked up as a director of HBRIC when this document was first presented. The first is that in regard to the matter that Councillor Bailey raised on the council's vision the most recent vision taken from our strategic plan actually says a healthy environment, a vibrant economy, and a prosperous economy. A vibrant community, sorry, and a prosperous economy. And that's it says pretty much the same thing, but uses different words from what's currently stated there. So we definitely should update that.
Yeah,
That's correct.
I'll update that, yeah.
So that was the first thing. The second thing is that the statement of intent is silent on HBRIC's participation in the capital fundraising considerations that the council's contemplating, and I'm wondering whether there should not be some intent signalled there as to what HBRIC's role might be.
I'd object to that.
You object?
Yeah, I would object to that because that's preempting the decision. I want to make that decision later. To make that in terms of the holistic of what we're thinking about. If we decide now, we've preempted the decision. I don't want to do that.
You're right.
I'd rather it's kept silent.
We can come back to it.
We can come back to it.
So can we come back and amend the SOI?
Anytime we like.
Look,
If necessary,
prior to June.
I'd make the observation, though, that there are generic provisions around oversight and ownership of the port assets, and there's probably a fair bit of activity for HBRIC, potentially as part of the transaction, which would be covered by the existing provisions anyway. So the need to revise this is probably pretty low, but it's come back to that after we've made a decision about the process and the involvement of the various parties in any transaction.
I agree with that. I think there's enough in the document as it stands to permit HBRIC to undertake whatever the council requests it to. So I don't think we necessarily need to add anything at this point in time.
Alan?
Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Look, I'm referring to the last paragraph on page 12 of the letter of expectation, where it says council shareholder wishes to further clarify its preference and position in regards to point 2, the above mentioned RWSS sale, by instructing the company to engage a third party to facilitate the sale, etc. Has a third party been approached or appointed?
Not at this point in time.
Oh, okay. I'd actually question the wisdom of the third party thing. It's almost like, is it going to be a consultant or a business broker? What are you going to do? You're going to lend them your watch so they can tell you the time. I would have thought that RWSS was in a very good position to do that job itself.
I'll comment on that. I personally agree with you, Alan. So what we have done is we've gone out, and Blair went out into the marketplace. So the directors of HBRIC have stood aside, and he's gone out independently to the marketplace. The only information that I have is that he had more than one interest. And so I'm guessing he probably had 3, but I have no idea. He's managed the negotiations independently with the parties that have showed an interest. And this afternoon, Blair has, and he will come back to council at a workshop this afternoon, and we will discuss them and have a view.
Well, that's fine, but it might mean that the letter of expectation may need to be amended slightly.
That's right. Neil, and then back to Debbie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Leah, I wonder if we can go to page 5 of the SOI, SCI. I'm looking at one to the 6th dot point down. Can you see that at the middle of the page? Currently it says that HBRIC will perform various issues such as advise council of any material capital expenditure projects by HBRIC or via its subsidiaries. Can I recommend a change to that, Mr. Chair? So instead of putting advise council of, we put obtain approval for. At the end of that dot point, put after subsidiaries or through joint venture partners. So I'm suggesting that we make it clear that the council approves those capital expenditures And at the next dot point, where it says only invest or dispose of investments, etc., at the end of that put as approved by council. So we're very clear that the council arbiter of those investments.
Can I just make a comment on that? So with regard to capital investment by HBRIC, I can understand the request, and in terms of the delegations that currently exist for HBRIC, that would require a modification, which I think, given the current way we've structured HBRIC, makes a lot of sense. In terms of any major capital investment by the port, I'd note that the port is an independent commercial entity with its own board, and in terms of major capital investment, I don't think it would be appropriate for the port to keep coming to the council every time it wants to spend money on major capital investments, because that's essentially its core business. So just a question to the councillor as to the intent with regard to how the port manages its day-to-day capital affairs. In terms of items like the investment in the potential new wharf, that certainly has been brought to the attention of the council, and given the financial implications, in effect, there's an approval process required, because it would require the port to go outside of its existing parameters for that investment. So it's just a question in terms of thoughts relative to the port.
Well, in response then, I think my initial thought was around HBRIC itself as opposed to the port. But having said that, I would expect a major capital investment, for example, building a wharf, would be a capital expenditure decision ultimately coming back to the port. So of that dimension, now I don't know how you frame that, but I have personally an expectation that this council ultimately resolves such major issues, but in specific to HBRIC, we take that, we make those decisions.
So one of the options is where we've got material expenditure, there's a definition of what material expenditure means and a clarity of where approval's required. So it wouldn't necessarily be unusual. For HBRIC, I think you might want to set a limited number to give HBRIC some operational flexibility, but it wouldn't be much. And for the port, you'd want to set it at a level that allows the port to operate as a commercial unit without needing to seek shareholder approval on a regular basis, given it's an asset-intensive business. But there's probably a number that makes sense to be discussed with the port for material investment.
I personally think, in terms of HBRIC making new investments, clearly that needs to be here. The port's a really different matter. We have a board of directors and a chairman and a governance organisation, and they need to decide on the capital expenditure, and they come back to us as shareholders whether we provide that capital or not, or whether they go outside. But I don't think as shareholders we should be influencing their decisions on their CapEx spending.
Not even for a wharf?
As far as it affects the dividends, I think that's probably where the trigger is the shareholder. So if they're going to make an investment that has a material impact on the dividends which come through this SOI, perhaps that's the appropriate vehicle to trigger those conversations, which the recent example, provides a good example of how that would work. Because ultimately, if the dividends are the primary financial measure through which you're assessing the performance of your holding company and then effectively its subsidiaries. So maybe if we reframe it where it needs to be approved if it's going to materially affect the dividends as part of that process.
Isn't the issue here, Chair, that there's a fine line between us being shareholders and deemed directors?
Exactly.
And if we're going to start making decisions about capital investments, we are then deemed directors. As far as the port company is concerned, we are the shareholder, and all our rights stem from what we are as shareholders. So you have to look at it as a shareholder. I just feel we're sort of moving in a direction here which is a step too far.
Well, I appreciate the point, Mr. Chair, and I think that Blair's solution is quite elegant because it contains our role to the role of shareholders. If we put the caveat on around the influence on the dividend that contains the issue to our issue as shareholders, in my mind.
I'm not even sure about that. I think perhaps if we could discuss this in our workshop, because as shareholders we elect the directors, and the directors should be representing us as shareholders, and it's not that responsible for directors to come back and say we're spending all the shareholders' money on capital for the next 3 or 4 years, and you're not getting your dividend. And as an associate of mine says, who's a major investor in the country, the shareholders have to eat as well. And it's a pretty irresponsible director who just leaves his shareholders out there bleeding. So in the end, I suppose our control factor is we elect the directors, and they should be representing the shareholders. And if they and the capex spend, but to get involved in the capex spend itself, or even say we insist on this level of dividend in writing, would be a little bit going a step too far in my view.
We effectively have that via the SOI, the dividend
Well, that's right.
requirement.
But the other point here, though, Chair, is I think we need to, as a council, distinguish between soft power and hard power.
That's right.
And what we have at the moment is soft power. We are the shareholders, and we exercise power and influence by way of shareholders. And if we as shareholders are deeply unhappy about things, we can call a special general meeting for a purpose. We can exercise real power. I don't think we should be using the statement of intent to somehow direct, to have hard power. We don't need it. And that's the fact that then interferes with the running of the port. I'm perfectly relaxed with where we're at. They come along and talk to us, they hear what our views are, and they know that if they go beyond what our views are, there will be trouble. So we don't need to do anything more than that.
Well, Mr Chair, I'm just trying to avoid no power.
There's plenty of power.
We elect the
Shareholders-
directors.
Well, can we move on then? And I'm not getting a lot of support for some clarity around that. Can we now move to page 6, page 20 at the bottom of page 6, and looking at the role of the Board of Directors. I just want some clarity in that stanza there. The second paragraph under role of Board of Directors, the Chief Executive, can I have some clarity there? Is that the HBRIC Chief Executive?
Yes, that's correct.
Can we insert that? After the
Well, it doesn't need it actually, because it's only about HBRIC.
Well, if you could indulge me a moment,
Yes, sorry.
Deputy Chair, if we turn to the Chief Executive has been delegated responsibility for the day-to-day management of the company, and that is the HBRIC Chief Executive. We now have, with agreed financial and administrative functions transferred to HBRC. So that's something that's now introduced into the equation. That's in the letter is agreed financial and administrative functions transferred to HBRC. And I'm suggesting we actually put that in to the SCI. Is there any objection to that?
Just to clarify, I think I understand where you're coming from. So I guess there's two ways to look at this. One is we could put in brackets after staff, council. I guess as a chief executive, you'd normally want some flexibility to manage your resources accordingly. So if and when there was the need for staff to support any particular projects, you'd want to have the flexibility to do that in the SOI. We also have the arrangement we have with council carries over into this coming financial period. So we have already effectively changed the staffing structure for HBRIC, and it no longer has an executive assistant, but the finance controller will be continuing to work for HBRIC until around about September, when the year-end process is complete.
Sure.
So.
Mr Chair, can you see my point though, that we've got a new hybrid model with transfers of financial administrative functions, and I'm seeking clarity as to whether the HBRIC CE is responsible or the council CE is responsible.
So where we're outsourcing to council, the HBRIC CE is responsible, and then the council outsourced staff need to perform to the requirements of HBRIC.
Through the
As
council CE?
As an outsourced provider.
Through the council CE?
Well, essentially they're providing a service to HBRIC, so therefore we need to meet the service expectations of HBRIC.
Point of chair here is, that are we writing an operational manual or are we writing a statement of intent?
Well,
And if we get down to this, we're writing an operational manual.
well, we may be, Mr Chair, but as per my colleague in raising issues around the expenditures of HBRIC, and that's what we are responsible for, the expenditures of HBRIC, I'm wanting clarity as to what budgets are applied to HBRIC and what expenditures are applied to the council.
So the current budget plan that forms this SOI, the more detailed, where's the money spent, has an assumption that where council staff are providing services, there's a funding payment from HBRIC to council as an outsourced provider effectively for those services.
And fully cost recovered, so there's no sense or suggestion that the council would be subsidising the provision of those services in any way, so on a full cost recovered basis.
So just for clarification, so in other words, the council will be invoicing HBRIC for
Yes.
Correct.
the services? Yep.
Absolutely, as we've done before.
Yep.
Sorry, yes,
Another
that's right.
question
Just reporting back, the reporting by the port directly to council, and I've got another brilliant suggestion. It's on page 10 under the objectives, performance targets, that at number 2, top of the page, that HBRIC will instruct Port of Napier to report to council on at least a quarterly or half-yearly basis. I think we'd already come to that conclusion. I'm just trying to quantify that.
Yes, so the plan is that the port will report to the council at least twice per annum.
Twice, yeah.
Yeah, they will report to the to HBRIC quarterly, so
Yes.
they provide a written report to us, and then they come and present on that on a quarterly basis. And then in our reports to you, it essentially will pass through the relevant information, but it's very much the intent that there's direct interface between council and the port.
Do we have that in there?
Put in. Debbie?
Thank you. James, question for you. With regards to $200,000 being spent on due diligence for a potential joint venture, forestry joint venture, we have heard some concerns coming from some parts of the community around any additional forestry expenditure and what that might mean for vibrant communities, which is one of our mission statements of what we believe in. So when will the community be able to have an input into that decision?
So when you refer to that decision, you're referring
Investment.
to investment at the completion of the building of the investment case. So that funding is there as some working capital for HBRIC to undertake the development of an investment case, which will consider social, environmental, as well as the economic
Community will have the
outcomes.
opportunity.
Once that investment case has been developed and presented to council, our expectation, based on the commitments that the council's given to date, is that that would then be put out for formal public consultation under the Local Government Act.
Thank you. My next question point, really, I was concerned to see that, as Ellen raised, a third party potentially being contracted to facilitate the sale of Rotunova assets. And we had a board of hugely experienced directors, and this council actively pursued a smaller board, so effectively decided that they want to save money, but to me it's false economy if you're going to get someone else, and I would like to see us addressing that and leaving Blair in place to be doing that, because I mean, of all the men left standing, Blair, you're probably the only one who really knows things through and through now.
Yeah.
Are you happy with what we're doing?
So no, well, that's the final paragraph on page 12. Page 2.
Page 2 of what?
The letter of expectation.
Yeah.
What's
So
the
no,
problem?
I wasn't happy with that part of it.
Well, what do you want?
Are you happy that Blair has done the process and going to report back to us this afternoon?
Yeah, but so if we're passing this, then I mean, why are we passing it if people are unhappy? Can we not address it now?
But my question is to the questioner, what is the unhappiness about, and what is it required to make them happy? I don't understand it.
I don't think we need to engage a third party.
Yeah, no, I think we all agree on that, so let's take that out. We're not doing that.
We're
You
trying-
do have a council
amending a
resolution.
letter we already sent.
Yeah, the letter's already gone. What on
It's
earth am I
already-
talking
We're not
about?
approving the letter. We approved the letter 6 years ago.
That's
Why are we amending it now?
quite correct. So you have a resolution that led to the drafting of the letter in its current form. If you'll need to
No,
resolve.
that's just pointless, James. We're agreed on how we should proceed. Look,
But,
let's just drop it.
and perhaps if I can add a comment, I have asked based on that resolution, that public resolution, I have asked the parties involved whether they would like to deal with an independent party or to deal with me as the CEO, and they have said they would prefer to deal with me as the CEO. So in terms of meeting your requirements for relevant independence, I think that's been achieved. Secondly, I'll note relative to the independence requirements, the council-appointed directors of HBRIC are not involved in any of the discussions relative to this process, so they're completely independent of it. And so I'm your sole independent agent as far as these discussions are concerned at the moment.
The question is, aren't we going to discuss this further? At a
We are. He's going to bring us the
So why don't we
feedback.
just leave that to that, and councillors can then express their views, and we'll get clarity on it at that point.
Do we have any more Tom?
Put this as a question, but a suggested word change on page 21 of our paper, 7 of the document, board appointments. This is under the subsidiary companies discussion. Then you go to board appointments, and there's a selection criteria here referring to their commercial expertise and aptitude. And I would suggest putting relevant expertise and aptitude. It seems to me that we might be talking about companies, for example, in the forestry realm, where a important piece of expertise would be what kind of forestry are we getting involved in, what kind of trees, et cetera. So that I don't regard that as a commercial expertise. It's a subject matter expertise that might be pertinent to that company. Similarly, risk assessment. Not all risk is commercial, as HBRIC found out with respect to the land swap. And having an appropriate director on HBRIC might have avoided a great deal of, a couple of years of Sturm and Drang, if there were a better assessment of what the risk was in that particular adventure.
So you're
and
saying appropriate?
So to me, it's appropriate, the word should be appropriate or relevant or something. It's
So what he
not,
wants is to take commercial out and put relevant.
it's not all about commercial.
Can I just
E-
clarify
even though
which
these
page
are-
of the SOI that's on?
Page 7.
Page 7.
Still leave the word commercial and just add relevant or appropriate.
Well, I just think Tom's, if you want to, finally, said Tom's got a point. But if you take out commercial, put relevant. Relevant covers commercial.
It does, appropriate does
Whatever.
as well.
Appropriate.
Either word is fine with me.
Sure, that's fine.
Okay.
But we're going to have relevant, appropriate, relevant, appropriate.
Appropriately relevant.
Relevant.
We have someone to move this paper, please. It's the receives and notes
I'll move it
with the changes.
With the amendment
just
to include
on-
relevant.
Thank you, Rick. Just on the feedback, so we're noted, we'll just put there that we've noted the
Yeah,
feedback.
it's got a couple of.
3.1, update council's vision to working
To wording as in.
as the strategic plan. 2, under board appointment, change commercial to appropriate relevant expertise.
Yep.
We have a move, do we have a seconder? Seconder, wish to speak? Rick? Paul, does anyone wish to speak? Tom does.
Yeah, I will vote for this reluctantly. Personally, I would be a lot more satisfied if item 4, nature and scope of activities to be undertaken, was simply replaced with the language in the original letter that very specifically under revised mandate indicated a revised mandate in very specific terms and limited terms, as opposed to a lot of generic language that could go anywhere at any time, as far as I'm concerned. So to me, this statement of intent is about 10 pages too long, and given the task at hand over the coming year.
We hear your message loud and clear, Tom. Neil?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm comfortable with supporting the document as is, but I would like to point out that the SCI opportunity is this council's opportunity to have its say, have its influence, and an arm's length, and in this case a double arm's length relationship with the assets held on behalf of the public. So the degree of intensity with which we look at the document, in my view, becomes very important, and thus getting down to some what may appear to be pedantic issues to me, and particularly given the history, is important. We leave things lacking in clarity, they get lost in the fog, and we end up with a circumstance which we didn't intend. So I make no apology for delving and diving into some wording so that we are clear about what we mean.
Thank you, Neil. Do you wish to... We have a mover and a seconder. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? It's carried. Thank you. Item 8.
I move we fix the common seal.
Fix the common seal. A whole lot of transfers, which I signed.
Did you?
Yeah,
Signed away all our assets.
signing away your assets.
So
Do we have a mover? Or
I've moved already.
Oh, you've moved?
Yeah.
Seconder? Do we have any speakers? All those in favour?
Aye.
Resolution, item 8. Against? Carried. Item 9, navigation. Now,
So, Chair-
Smoko?
We can-
do you want to stop for a quick cup of tea?
Oh, I don't need to, I just wonder whether...
Would you want to grab a cup of tea and bring it back?
Oh, no, let's knock the rest of it. It's all right. We'll do this in 5 minutes.
Do you want to talk to
Yeah,
us?
so Chair, look, this one, the bylaw was adopted by council, and it's had a minor amendment to it made by Maritime New Zealand as part of the process whereby they finally approve it, and so this paper is really just for noting that.
So, question, so that, James, so that minor amendment is the one that's on page 60 that's highlighted in yellow?
Page
Which
20.
talks about the launch vehicles and everything
Correct,
else.
Yeah.
correct. This was in relation to Rocket Lab.
And that's the only change to the one that the bylaw that we passed?
Correct.
Yep.
Just
I'll
a,
move the document.
no, just a query. We're just being asked to receive a note. We're not being asked to adopt this
Yeah.
in its final form, which is a bit surprising to me.
So as I understand it, the reason for that is that Maritime New Zealand is the final approver.
Not us.
That's correct, and so they've done their piece in the process now, and so it has been finally approved, and they have the ability to make minor amendments rather than refer the whole thing back.
Okay, in that case, I'm happy to second, Chair.
A mover and a seconder?
Yep.
You wish to speak?
I just want to say to we should send a note of thanks to Martin Moore for his diligence in this. I think he's done a fine job. Note of appreciation.
Peter?
Chair.
Any other speakers?
Rockets, great.
Yeah, I thought it was, you wish to speak, Paul? I thought it was a particularly good report, and I have to say I learnt a lot about maritime law and what I should not or should do just in case I do ever afford to have a boat. I can go and where I can't go. It's quite detailed. So, all those in favour of accepting this report?
Aye.
Aye. Against? It is carried. Unanimously accepted. Okay, staff projects and activities. Any questions? Tom?
3, item 31 on page 88. What is, can somebody tell me what that is?
I'm sorry, I don't think anyone present would be able to answer that question for you, Councillor. We'll come back and we'll provide you with an answer from the science team on
Point
that.
source, what is point source?
So point source is where we have a particular location in which is contributing an environmental contaminant.
Like a sewage outfall.
It's a
It's a
pipe.
point source.
A pipe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you can point to it and go, yep.
Does that answer you, Tom? That
No, I understand, I knew what a point source was, but this still doesn't help me understand what actually is being done here, but
Okay, we'll come back to you on
I
that.
will await an
Debbie,
answer.
have you got a question?
Wait a minute. Two more, please.
Two more.
He said three. Bags.
42, the Glazebrook dam break study. Is this a break in the existing dam?
No, this is a study of the engineering requirements to manage the risk of a break for an increased structure, which may be a solution to the flow augmentation challenges under the tank plan change.
So I understand, okay, that's what I thought, and I guess my question is there a cosmetic issue here in that we are committing funds to examining a dam failure of a dam that tank has yet to consider and endorse?
So look, my view is that this is very early days. This is looking at essentially the viability of the site for a larger dam, and in that respect, it helps us to understand whether there is an option there. So I think it helps tank with its deliberations.
So I'd just be careful in presenting it.
Point taken.
Because it's the first time I think anybody be aware that we're spending money on.
Yes.
Number 62, I'm sorry, not 62, 64. A pilot project on developing ecosystem health indices is underway. And my question or concern here is this, we've spent a lot of time, for example, in tank, developing agreed upon measures of health of the various catchments and river bodies and streams and so forth that we're evaluating and applying some new rules to. Does something like this come along and turn that on its head? No, here's another way to measure ecosystem health?
So I don't believe so. This project will give us hopefully some indicator species that we can have particular monitoring focus on, because they represent a wider ecosystem health outcome, if you like. And it is something which we've discussed informally with, certainly with Councillor Curtin in relation to hotspots and the idea of having indicator species that could be used to ensure the community understands how we're going in terms of ecosystem performance, and to highlight a particular indicator species.
Cool.
That's all three, Tom?
Thank you.
Peter, how many have you got?
Yeah, just one, Chair. Just reading Plan Change 6 implementation on page 88.
What
prompted
number?
Some thinking on my part about a process that I would call continuing education, and I've raised this with James previously and want to put it on the table for other people to think about. And I think about it in this context. I passed my law degree in 1971 or 2.
After how many years?
After 4 years of study. But in
How many years in fifth form?
2018, I'm not qualified to give people advice on the law, because it's changed a hell of a lot. And farming is like that as well. And farmers need to commit and invest in continuing education. And it seems to me that the process of FEMPS and resource consents and what have you gives us an opportunity to get farmers to do that, because many of them are the same as me. They qualified as farmers 20, 30, 40 years ago, if they actually even went to study. And techniques and environmental requirements and all the rest of it have changed incredibly since then, and our level of knowledge and research and so forth that can support much better land use management practices. And I think farmers need to go through courses of study and continuing education, and I think it needs to be built in to our systems that we require them, to attend field days and workshops and so forth on a regular basis. And I put it on the table that we need to find some way to get that to happen.
Wow, that would get a reaction in some quarters.
What's wrong with my grandpappy's way of fame? You
makes
say
me-
good fun.
Thank you, Peter. Any other questions?
That makes me look like a
I don't think we
pansy.
need to answer that. Do you want an answer to that?
No, I'm putting it on the table for
Yeah.
people to think about.
Well, they're going to.
Compulsory education.
Debbie and then Paul.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, James, who the new FEMP project manager is.
It is Shane Gilmore.
Is he existing?
Yep, he's an internal staff appointment. So he was previously one of our water technicians, but broadly qualified in environmental management, and he applied for the role through an internal process and has been successful. And look, I actually have I have an update on total FEMP numbers as of this morning. And if you just bear with me, I can give you the precise numbers, which as of this morning, we have 692 properties now meeting the requirements, which is 504 FEMPs, 136 low-intensity forms, and 52 FEMPs formally in process in addition. So that's an increase on 140 from the numbers last given in an update. We are predicting that around 830 properties will meet their obligations by either having a FEMP done or one in progress by the 31st of May. And that will give us 80% of the total area and 90% of the eligible area in the catchment covered. And so that's pretty substantial progress in the last few months, for which I think both the community down there and our land management team deserve some recognition. 80% of total area and 90% of eligible area.
Is this ahead of projection?
Well, we were fairly pessimistic, I think, at the start of this year about the progress we had made over the last 3 years. But certainly there's been an enormous level of activity in the last few months. And so we are putting up some thank you billboards around Central Hawke's Bay to acknowledge the efforts that have been made. And there's been some publicity go out in relation to this progress. Obviously, there are still some non-compliant properties, and that will be the focus of our attention over the next few months.
Are you going to name and shame?
No, we don't intend naming and shaming at this point in time.
Paul?
Thank you, Chair. I was a little surprised under engineering on page 87 that there's no projects or whatever going on. Maybe I'm looking in the wrong report about our dam that we ended up with, the one that borders between Wairau and Gisborne. I can't remember the name.
Mungapuiki. So look, it is continuing to be monitored by the Gisborne District Council. The situation is effectively stabilised there after the civil works that we undertook and funded up there to build a rock-armoured channel over the crest of the dam. Water has been flowing, and the lake effectively is at a stable level. So the whole situation's stabilised. As I say, Gisborne District Council are keeping an eye on things, but it's essentially settled.
Cool.
Peter?
Tank Chair and the WCO, Tom, you gave an update last night at the meeting, which I think was yesterday afternoon. I think it might be quite helpful if you just updated council on what the process is and how the two processes are aligning or misaligning, as the case may be.
Well, the two processes are on parallel courses, and there's no pulling them apart. So we provided a memorandum update to the Special Tribunal. I think it was on the 16th of May. We just primary purpose of that update was to just confirm that we were predominantly on track providing the specific scientific reports that we'd indicated we'd provide them back earlier on in the year, so they're on track to receive those reports. We also gave quite a comprehensive update of what has been achieved in TANC and those meetings, and we also gave them an update on some of our discussions with the co-applicants to give effect to the special tribunal's request that we kind of work together to try and come to at least have discussions in the interim before the hearings, second stage hearings on the lower river, which we'll presume in July. We have been advised, and I think all the parties have now been advised, that our counsel and counsel for the co-applicants have been invited to participate in a teleconference call with the special tribunal on Friday at midday, and so we'll wait to hear what the tribunal's questions are of our counsel at that stage.
Tom, I'd like to ask you, so the applicants for the water conservation order, are they working with us? I don't get the feeling that they are talking to anyone who's got their feet on the ground here. They clearly said that they refused, actually, an invitation from the landowners in the Upper Nararora. So I'm just not sure. What have they done to put a hand across this bridge?
So just speaking with our legal counsel yesterday, we are anticipating that they are going to provide some form of their own update to council, to the tribunal, in terms of how they see the progress being made. I do understand that a couple of the other groups who are probably in opposition to the order and the lower have reached out to have an engagement with the applicants. I'm not sure whether they've been successful, so that will be no doubt discussed this Friday. When we received a response from the co-applicants effectively saying it was their preference not to come and meet with landowners in the upper, they did ask us to, as an alternative, provide our perspective on the order. So we have, it was quite a large piece of work, on a completely sort of non-prejudice basis, we have provided a summary and review of our particular concerns or issues or comments around the detail of the proposed order, and so that's sitting with them.
Not sure what that answer was, really.
I'll move the report be received.
Yeah, okay. Do we have a mover? Do we have a seconder? Seconder? Do you wish to speak? All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Against? We accept the report. So we are on to discussions not on the agenda, and I wasn't here when all that.
We've got wastewater consents. There's one item, and that's wastewater, and that's Tom Belford.
And it could be wastewater / stormwater. In the weekly reports we get of consent applications, many of them have reference to permission to discharge stormwater or wastewater, blah, 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 in a manner which may cause environmental damage, whatever. What is generally going on with those consents? What are people proposing to do, basically?
Sorry, I was having a conversation with Leon as you started that, Councillor. Are you referring to municipal wastewater consents, or are you talking about private consents?
And there may not be anybody here to answer the question, but the weekly reports we get of consent applications, a fair number of them every week deal with the statement of intention is that somebody's looking to discharge stormwater or wastewater in a manner that may cause blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
And that's all we sort of see. And I'd like to get a better sense at some point as to what's being contemplated in those consents.
So they are under virtually every scenario will be a residence, a rural residence, where they're putting in their own septic system, a wastewater treatment system.
Sometimes they're much more significant than that. They're commercial enterprises. There are all sorts of applicants.
And so there are a whole range of standards that they need to meet, and that is a highly prescriptive area. happy to arrange a briefing for you.
Okay.
Probably doing that offline would be the most sensible thing to do.
right.
It is a highly developed area of regulation by council. As I say, it is highly prescriptive, and the consents do require typically the use of best available technology.
Okay.
So we have another one here, arsenic in private wells, and it's got Rex or James. Well, it's not me. I'm just hoping there's no arsenic in my well. But,
It's Jeff Smith to come up. So this is in relation to priority. So look,
Yes, Jeff, if you could.
we had intended to do this as part of the staff update. So Jeff has a presentation to run through. Councillors have been previously advised of the finding of arsenic in groundwater in priority. And so we're coming to the conclusion of the investigation and public engagement on this. Give an update.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Mr. Chair. This is just a briefing to councillors. There's a media release going out today and a public notice tomorrow regarding arsenic that has been discovered in groundwater resources in Hawke's Bay. So this is just to keep council informed, and Drew's handing out the media release now. So just to put this whole issue in context, the maximum acceptable value for arsenic in groundwater under the Drinking Water Standards of New Zealand is 10 micrograms per litre, and that's based on long-term exposure. So it's not an instant poisoning health issue. It's a long-term exposure that increases risk of cancer over a lifetime. That's what that's based on. And to put that in perspective, a grain of salt is about the same mass as 500 micrograms, which is 50 times the MAV, or the maximum acceptable value. If you were to cut that into 50 tiny pieces and put one of those 50 pieces into a litre of water, that's what the maximum acceptable value is.
I hope you're saying that in this.
This doesn't tell me a thing.
Because that's the kind of thing the public will understand. Arsenic just freaks everyone out, and we need to take it down a grain of salt.
Yeah, in the press release.
You have pressed to find any groundwater that doesn't have arsenic in it.
That's correct.
So
Yep.
it just sounds like this is something rare and extreme. It's not.
Yeah.
I'll get to that. Yeah.
I just say,
It is. It's not an uncommon thing in New Zealand. Groundwater with elevated arsenic is also found in Canterbury, Marlborough, Manawatu, Bay of Plenty, and in Waikato regions. And invariably the source is natural, but it is an issue that water with elevated arsenic is regarded as not potable. In Hawke's Bay, this first came to our attention about this time last year when community water supply in Breckenridge, someone had their water tested that was on that supply and found concentrations that were twice the maximum acceptable value. And late last year in Pukahu, again, a private bore owner had their water tested and found arsenic that was about 1.5 times the maximum acceptable value. And most recently in Priority Hill, there was a private bore owner that notified us that they had arsenic concentrations of 500 micrograms per litre, so that's 50 times the MAV. I'll just go through each of those very briefly, one by one. This is Breckenridge. The private bore there is indicated in the centre. Initially, the finger was pointed at the Omarunui landfill, thinking that might be a potential source. We undertook some sampling and investigation, and those two red circles there are the only samples that we found that were greater than the MAV. The blue circles around the green dots are surface water samples, and the other green dots are groundwater samples that were clear of arsenic. So what we found there, it was a very localised issue, and it was considered to be a consequence of the geochemistry, the groundwater chemistry, and the substrate that occurs in that localised area. So that community took the information that we gave them. We had public meetings, and they resolved to move their bore because obviously there's safer water fairly close to there. In Pukahu, We've just received a draft report from contractors. In the middle of that graph there is the private bore that we were first notified that had a concentration about 1.5 or 2 times the MAV, and we did we contracted an investigation sampling within 1 kilometre of that bore. And what these results show us is that the green triangles are safe water. The yellow ones and orange and red are above the maximum acceptable value. So what we see here is no real clear evidence of any contaminant plume, and the draft report concludes that the source of arsenic there is also likely to be natural.
So the worst in that one is 3 times above?
Yes, correct. Yeah. And priority, the investigation has recently concluded, and what we found there, all the blue dots here are safe to drink. The orange, red and yellow dots are not. The 2 red dots there are greater than 100 micrograms per litre, so more than 10 times the maximum acceptable value. And again, we've concluded that it's extremely likely to be natural source. There's no evidence of any human activities that have caused this. Also, it seems to be fairly random. Some bores are close together, and one bore will have arsenic in it, the other one won't. And that's consistent with overseas research. This is a paper published on arsenic in South Asia groundwater. It says in many regions the occurrence of arsenic in groundwater is not uniform, and it's really common for wells in close proximity to have those large variations in arsenic concentrations, like what we're seeing here. So to summarise that and what we're doing, although not all bores are affected, we can't discount the possibility that arsenic may be in groundwater anywhere in the region. It's extremely likely to be from natural sources, and it's very difficult to predict where elevated arsenic may be present. So in that respect, it's not really practical, or I don't consider it to be effective to do any surveys of the groundwater, because we could pick a bore that has safe groundwater 100 metres away, there might be arsenic, and would give people a false sense of security. So in that respect, we've considered in the first instance, and possibly our ongoing response, is to advise private bore owners via public notice and a media release that's going out today and on our website, that they're responsible for testing, monitoring and maintaining their own water supplies, and in that respect they've been advised to test for arsenic in their groundwater supplies. So that's the very short summary in the short time that I have.
Mr. Chairman, can you treat it out in any way with carbon or anything like that?
It is possible to treat it using reverse osmosis, which isn't cheap, and it also relies on the equipment being maintained, and given the groundwater conditions that we have here, it would be quite expensive to keep it ongoing and risky. The advice we've been giving to people is to look for an alternative source of water.
Have we got any tests of bores over time to see whether the arsenic is present permanently or only occasionally, or changes the level over time?
We don't yet. We have, based on these events, we've introduced arsenic into the suite that we analyse for in the State of Environment monitoring bores. So any that we pick up arsenic in, we'll have an idea of what's happening over time in terms of that change. In the Waikato region, they did find some differences between summer and winter.
Debbie?
Are you planning, thank you, are you planning on doing any tests in other areas, the likes of Wairoa, Central Hawke's Bay, just to give a bit of assurance after a notice like this goes out?
Yeah, as I said, we've added arsenic to the suite of analytes in the State of Environment monitoring, so quarterly samples.
But like immediately, when this is going to set off a panic, that you could be saying, well, you know, we haven't got issues here or here or here.
I think, as I said before, the spatial variability is such that we could go into a certain area, find what we think is a representative bore and miss the arsenic because it's so variable. So the best response we consider at this stage is for people to have their own water tested.
It brings me to my point. I just feel personally that this press release sets the tension higher than is necessary. almost all water will have levels of arsenic in it. Everywhere. Arsenic is in the environment everywhere. And to have that we discovered it means like it's unusual. Well, to my way of thinking, it's not unusual. It's just a background chemical which is there, varies up and down at very low levels. And I just think that I would tune this down about. Just one of those things that's there.
Yeah, but, just on, so you've done a great job. You're a scientist and you've found this out. I think what council needs to do is talk about how they want a press release to go out. That's Rick's point. So unless it's any...
It's already gone.
But it seems to me we make a reference at the end to working with the DHB, but since the concern here is ultimately is there a health risk, or what is the magnitude of health risk, why would this not be going out very jointly, at least, with the DHB, who's in a better position to advise people as to should they be panicked, not panicked, should if you find it in your water, are you going to die tomorrow? Or I mean, the questions that people are going to have about this are going to be health-related questions, and not. I mean, some people may question: is it every bore? Is it, universal and all that? Were the responders to that part of the equation? But the putting out a release like this is going to generate health angst. For anybody who's on bore water in Hawke's Bay, I would presume, and they're all going to call up their GPs or somebody or whatever, I don't know. And we're on top of that, we're telling them, and plus you're kind of out of luck because there's nothing you can do that doesn't cost a fortune to get it out of your water supply. So you have to be thinking about a new water supply. There's a lot of bad news here, potentially, and it does seem, though, that the nub of it is how significant a health risk is this presenting to the people of Hawke's Bay, and the DHB should be the front voice on that, it seems to me.
I think what we're doing is managing the public relations of this. We've got this report, managing the public relations, because you could say long-term consumption of wine with alcohol in it is carcinogenic, which it is. So,
but we have alternatives.
I haven't found them. But the point is, we don't want to spook people, because arsenic's it's like saying the Nazi Party, isn't it? It's got such a terrible connotation with it. But we need to talk to Drew about that. From your perspective, you've told us what it is. It's hard to, just so that we can talk to the community, really hard. You don't have a well here and a well there, and it's natural forming. People have been drinking it for years. So, Neil.
Well, I'm assuming we know who all those consent holders are for bores. Is this something we can communicate directly by letter to each bore holder to say, we have some results, you may wish to test? Do we need to go global on this? That's not a bad idea.
We did consider that. The problem is there will be permitted activities for domestic use from bores that we're not aware of. We know there are bores in the region that we don't have in our database, and the most effective way to do this at this stage is the public notice and media release, I think. I just refer to Councillor Balford's comment as well. We have been working really closely with the DHB and the TLAs on this, and they've seen the media release, the public notice, and their contact details are at the bottom of those for people who've got concerns about their health.
The point I want to make to you is what Brett says. Most people think arsenic is something which was created in Dr. Frankenstein's laboratory to harm humans. Most people won't be aware that arsenic is a common chemical found all the way through the environment, and it comes from the erosion of rocks and so on. It's just there. It's in the background all the time. It doesn't affect us. So what I'm trying to say is that this here seems to make out like it's like an underground thing. If I read the show, discovered, what? Just the words.
Yeah, we need to be really careful.
Yeah, I just. You're quite right about all the science. All I'm just saying is just wind it back. This is an everyday thing. We drink it all the time, whether we know it or not. It gets past a certain level, you've got to be careful. Yeah. So just be cautious here. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, what about the municipal supplies? Are
They test annually for arsenic and other heavy metals. I'm aware that Napier City Council, as Councillor Barker said, there is arsenic there. It's below the maximum acceptable value. Yeah. And I definitely take the point that this has potential to be sensationalised and taken to the extreme. We've been very careful at community meetings to keep that in perspective. And the only thing we've done in the media release, I guess, in that respect is to point out that it is a worldwide issue and it's also found in other places in New Zealand. I think it would be remiss of us as a council managing a resource not to inform people that
I agree with that.
that their drinking water is potentially containing arsenic that's greater than the maximum acceptable value set out by the World Health Organisation.
I agree with that.
Can you boil it?
No, boiling it would probably make it more concentrated, to be fair.
So,
Okay.
no, I think, if I'm agreed, I think you've got to notify the public.
Do
But
agree.
you need to avoid this being sensationalised as well, and Rick's quite right. Saying you've recently discovered it, I would much rather you said you've confirmed the presence of low levels or something like that, because that's all it is.
Naturally occurring low level, sometimes it's now been found that sometimes it's excess of what's recommended.
I just got the feeling when directing those comments to the wrong people, and with Drew sitting at the back of the room there, we should have him up there.
Well, I think he's got the message, and as James has pointed out, some people have got it higher, and they probably do have to move their well. So we need to just put it out there and say, check your well, and we're here to advise you if you've got very high levels. It's naturally occurring, it's random, or it just needs to be a little story like that. But Drew's got the message, and maybe we should change this slightly, Drew. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
We've all got that. So there are no other minor items, so thank you very much. Everybody, we've got a long lunch, which I'm sure your union will appreciate.
So we start at 1.
Fully paid, yeah.
But the chairman going to get his checkbook out this time and take us all to lunch, some slap up.
Chair, if you were of a mind to, we could...